Now, here's the thing, before everyone starts playing the doomsday music for the Ukrainians, don't do that too fast. We have to remember, Ukraine is currently in the process of preparing a massive counteroffensive. To all you gurus of this war who have been watching this war from the very beginning, if you saw the Kharkiv counteroffensive where they recovered this amount of territory in like a few days, and those same people probably also saw the Kherson counteroffensive where Ukraine slowly but surely grinded the Russians out of Kherson Oblast, those counteroffensives are likely nothing on the scale, at least manpower-wise, of what Ukraine is preparing for this counteroffensive. I've literally seen Wagner sources stating that Ukraine could have up to 400,000 men ready for this offensive. Some other sources saying 200,000 troops. Let's take the lower number. If Ukraine has prepared 200,000 troops for this offensive, that is literally more troops than Russia invaded Ukraine with at the beginning of the so-called special military operation. And if Ukraine concentrates these forces on one area like Zaporozhye or Kherson, Luhansk or Donetsk, these areas are highly likely to crack. So I think it would be very unwise for people, whether you're part of the pro-Ukraine crowd or you're part of the pro-Russian crowd, to start saying, oh, Russia's going to win just because they captured Bakhmut. If someone seriously believes that the capture of Bakhmut is going to lead to Ukraine losing the war, this person is not well versed. There are plenty of examples throughout history of when a military lost a town or a city or a village they fought for hard, and in that fight they lost a lot of men, but they still won the war. The Soviet Union during World War II has probably taught more lessons on how to turn seemingly absolute defeat to victory than any country in the last 300 years of human existence. The USSR literally had Nazi troops practically surrounding Moscow, and yet at the end, who took Berlin? The Soviets took Berlin. This is very common throughout warfare. I don't think it's wise for someone to see the first year of a war and then determine how the war is going to be. That is very foolish. We have to remember, despite the fact that Russia has made gains all around Bakhmut, and despite the fact that taking Bakhmut could pose a serious risk to the Ukrainian fortresses of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, despite that being a fact, and yes it is a fact, and yes it is dangerous for the Ukrainians, the Russians are not advancing practically anywhere else across the front line. If we go to Avdiivka, the Russians have basically not moved in like the last 8 months. Yes, they took some ground, but I'm talking about big gains. No, big gains have not existed in the Russian military for a very long time. If we go back down to Volodar, many people keep forgetting about Volodar, so they keep making a video of the Battle of Bakhmut. Volodar, I mean, this battle just happened. The Russians just launched this assault back in January, and there's still many skirmishes going on. And the Russian forces were obliterated in Volodar. I'm talking about dozens of tanks, dozens of AFVs. It was horrific. The Russians were obliterated here. And one thing I've noticed, that's what a lot of pro-Russian commentators or pro-Russian followers like to do. They like to pick and choose which part of the front they look at just so they can cope with the reality that Russia is not winning the war the way they want to believe they are. Okay, so even if Bakhmut falls, this in no way entails that Ukraine's going to lose the war. And depending on how big and successful Ukraine's upcoming counteroffensive is, Bakhmut could literally just be a blip on the screen. The capture of Bakhmut by Russian forces is extremely unlikely to change the tide of the war. On the other hand, if Ukrainian forces recapture Kherson and Zaporozhye, or if they drive the Russian forces out of Luhansk, this will change the tide of the war. And here's the thing, this possibility is a lot more likely considering the tens of thousands of troops that Ukraine has ready for this offensive. Now granted, Putin's partial mobilization did give Russia at least 300,000 troops to defend this region that they have in Ukraine, this strip of territory. And considering how small this strip of territory is, it does make the Russian concentration of defenders, therefore it can be a lot harder for the Ukrainians to break through.